Welcome to EIG's 33rd webinar, a fireside discussion with our experts from the industry, Suzanne van Egmond from Philips in the Netherlands, and Paul Reynolds from Acoustiic in Seattle, Washington. So we're covering as far as it reaches. We just missed Asia, maybe next time. Our webinar today is focused on, of course, new product introduction, speed through resiliency. And of course, we want to thank you very much for joining us today, and we appreciate that you're taking this time to join us for this webinar. And this is the capstone webinar, the 5th webinar in the series on NPI Speed through Resiliency. Our first webinar focused on new product introduction, speed to resiliency on building a foundation. Our second webinar focused on rational risk-taking. And our third webinar focused on digital transformation. And then our most recent webinar focused on accelerating NPI with agile sprints aligned with phase gate discipline. We look forward to an interactive webinar, and I can see that some of you have already started to answer the polling questions to practice on there, and we appreciate all your support. And it's great to see that a number of you have attended the previous webinars. It's okay if you haven't, but we want to really receive your feedback and want to make this a real fireside chat and get your feedback. So please do log into the Poll Everywhere website that you find in the chat. And opening a separate browser will help. We will be doing a ranking later in the webinar. So that would be very helpful if you do that. My name is Jim Vries, founder and president of Enhance International Group. EIG is a platform of consultants, consulting companies, and SaaS providers. And we work we are dedicated to empowering your organization's workforce to expand and sustain your organization to become a resilient enterprise. Our goal is to provide collective, collaborative, experienced thought leadership to enable your organization to deliver self-sustaining, positive margin growth. We hope we find this informative. The slides will be available after the webinar, so you don't have to worry about screenshots. You will get the slides as everyone who participates in it and registers for all EIG webinars. Before we get started, we do have a couple webinars coming up that I wanted just to mention. Next week, we have a webinar on de-risking, project de-risking. Then the following week, we're back to our artificial intelligence webinar series on video insight for safety. And then we'll get into back to supply chain risk and resiliency the following week, together with some digital twin work with another EIG partner. Today we have with us some very esteemed folks, Dr. Phil Samuel, Dr. Mark Sneeringer, Dr. Suzanne Egmond, and Dr. Paul Reynolds. So a bunch of very, very smart people here at the webinar to guide you. So I'll start off with Mark, a brief introduction.
Sure. Yes, I've been doing continuous improvement work for quite a few years, most recently working with different companies, mainly around new product introduction and design for Six Sigma.
Phil?
I'm Phil Samuel. Most of my career, I've been involved in developing new products and services, ranging from a variety of industries. And currently, I help in innovation and strategy work.
Thanks, Phil. Suzanne?
Yeah, hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I am Suzanne van Egmond. I have a 22 years career for Philips since now. 1/3 of that I spent as a lean product development coach or master, whatever you want to call it. Half of that was in the beginning I spent on lighting and doing group leadership and project management in there. And then the remainder, I leave it to you to figure out how much that is. I spent in domestic appliances, where I still am. Domestic appliances is being sold off at this moment in time, and I will head the R&D Lean Process Excellence group in there, and we are responsible for the ways of working, product development processes, and also knowledge flow. And I saw on the participants list 2 of my team members are in the call. Welcome, special welcome to you.
Fantastic. They're going to ask you some good questions, I'm sure.
I hope so.
And Paul.
Thank you. So Paul Reynolds, most of my career has been in ultrasound, predominantly medical ultrasound devices. I spent many years leading a company that developed computer simulation software for the ultrasound industry, trying to do virtual prototyping to speed up production and NPI. Since then, I have worked in a variety of companies, my own small, medium, and large companies, led product introductions on some premium systems. And now I am the co-founder and CTO of Acoustiic, which is a medical device company using focused ultrasound to treat cancer with non-invasive surgery.
Very impressive. Very impressive group of folks here today to get some good dialogue. So our agenda today, we have a list of things to do, to discuss, and just like that, excuse me, you know, we know that the world is getting faster and faster. Pop-ups are happening anytime, anywhere. And, you know, we want to gain some insight from our experts on the fact that the world is becoming a smaller and smaller place. Our product service cycle times are getting shorter and shorter, and therefore we're having to deal with larger constraints, and there's more and more disruptions. Some people say that the disruptions have always been there, but they seem to be more frequent and higher impact. And whoever is able to deal with those faster and faster are going to be the ones who are better off. So we'll talk just a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the different webinars that we covered before. We're covering our last webinar first, and then rational risk taking, and then we'll get into digitization and then the foundation. So this is going to be an open discussion. So we want to get as many of you involved as possible throughout the webinar. So with that, Mark, kick us off here on the need for speed today.
Yeah, you can go ahead and bring up the rest of the slide, but basically, you know, speed's always been an objective. Cycle times or product cycles are getting shorter and shorter. And the thing that's sort of been added to this with the global pandemic is that there's some things that are hampering innovation in terms of, you know, you don't get the customer interactions as easily, or you haven't over the last year and a half. In-person collaboration has been limited, and being able to get into the lab's been limited. And then our supply chains have been very much disrupted. So these are the sorts of topics that drove us toward this understanding. Okay, what can we do to get speed in this sort of a situation? So Jim, go ahead.
Well, I would look for feedback for maybe Paul or Suzanne on what you're seeing in your marketplaces.
Will you start, Paul? Then I can think a little about it.
So I'll say, interestingly, on the supply chain, we actually have all the components we need, but what we had done ahead of time was I tend to look to buy ahead and actually go, okay, what happens if we are in a situation where something has gone wrong with the product we are currently developing, and actually have backup options. It costs more initially to do that, but you're then in a position where if things go wrong, you actually have supply sitting on your shelf. And I think a lot of NPI side or R&D side groups, if they're in a larger company that also does production, there's typically a mindset in that company where it's you you are just in time. Don't have things on the shelf. And in fact, company culture and even getting POs done can be very, very hard to do. And I think you actually need two mindsets, one of which is time is your, time and iteration is really important. So have things on the shelf, even if you don't use them. If there's a 10% chance you're going to need something in a big project, it's worth having because it's so expensive to have a 3-month cycle time delay. So I think for me, one of the things is split your NPI thinking from your product, your actual production thinking. And that can be hard in a larger company. I'm fortunate enough to be in a smaller company of my own where I don't have to think that. So we got ahead. Where we have a problem now is, do we buy even more because we think the market might run out of product components because everybody's panic buying? So do we panic buy because everybody else is panic buying? Not because we necessarily need it. So it's almost like the toilet paper issue. I don't actually need it yet, but I may need it in future. So that's the unknown for me right now. The known is buy ahead and assume a bunch of it's not going to get used. Where are we going here? That's a good question, and I'm not certain the answer there.
Yeah. So the typical time is money, and stockpiling is a way that a lot of folks are dealing with this. But then we end up with stockpiles, which then drive up prices with everybody buying. So then you lose your JIT low cost. So it's a trade-off. And that, I think that's a very hot topic today. And be very interested to hear how others are dealing with this. Suzanne?
Yeah, if I draw it back to product development, then what I see in domestic appliances is actually that our demand increased even in the COVID crisis, because we are here to turn houses into homes, as we call it. So we are here to help people to have the product that they make their homes enjoyable to stay in. So I guess the only one that was a little bit suffering was the ironing, because no one had needed shirts to be ironed, of course. So, that was well made up by others. So I think what we see is the continuation of the pressure to be fast. I think consumer products in general ask for fast product development, because you do not want such a long time between identifying a demand and delivering onto it, because consumers are also extremely changing their minds. So if you think that they need something 2 years back, then probably it has changed now. So it's better to be a little bit faster. So that is why I think for us it's a continuous challenge to become faster every single project.
So you see this product life cycle being reduced. You're living that, is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So if there's any comments from the folks on the line, please enter it in the chat. Any questions or comments? We'd love to get everyone's perspective on this topic. We're going to build on this topic on the next slide, unless Phil or Mark want to add something on this. Okay, I'll move on. So it's almost a summary of what we just discussed of, who's going to win in the long run, because we have this lack of supply or change in supply and a changing demand. And, we would espouse that, from a digital capability, whoever has the best digitization capability for this transition is going to come ahead. So there's a lot of pressure to do digitization of different processes in the organization to deal with these types of issues, like, of course, a pandemic, but also a lot of other things, like, because of this, as we regain ourselves and we try to figure out what is the new supply-demand balance across all our supply chains, because we've changed things, we're repackaged, materials moving, the containers are all in the wrong place to move the goods. That was the first blockage. They were shipping, actually, they're shipping, the ships, the large ships were full of containers, and you you couldn't ship your goods because they were shipping empty containers back, and you couldn't put anything on those containers because the containers themselves were worth more than the freight in them. And that's what's happening right now. So moving goods around the world is causing these large increases. We're having different issues from supplier failures, work stoppage, and of course, cybersecurity issues that keep popping up more and more. And it's almost a way of life today. So whoever is able to digitize while being safe from a cyber perspective, it is thought, and many are saying, is it will create that differentiation. So I'd love to get the feedback of you all, everyone on the line, on these types of thoughts. Paul?
Sure. So my career has been roughly split in two. Half of it's been predominantly software with some hardware. The other half is predominantly hardware with some software. And the software side of it is it simplifies things down tremendously when you don't have to worry about the supply chain. So when you can just, a rebuild is essentially click a button and recompile, whereas in hardware, it's find suppliers, get new components in, and you are restricted that way. So definitely, as much as you can move over to digital, the better in terms of speed. But I will come back to I think something that we were talking earlier. If you simplify it down, there's the old saying, you've got speed, you've got quality, and you have cost. And if right now everybody's pushing for speed, well, which of the two out of the three are you going to pick? Are you going to pick quality or cost? And all the time you'll ask management, do you want quality or cost? And the answer is yes. It's you've got to pick. And I think that's where
that's nice.
I think that's where you've really got to look. And I think one of the best things management can do is be very, very clear on where you're going. Okay, you want speed, so pick one of the other two. And are you in a cost-driven market, or are you in a quality-driven market? And if you're quality, just pay whatever it takes. Just pay what it takes to get it done.
Your story, Paul, reminds me of one of the first slides that we had in our Lean Basics training in Philips, and it had actually this cost, quality, and time circles. And then, of course, we were asking the class, and they would say something like that, that it's a lever, and if you maximize one, then you will give in on one of the others, which is also in a lot of classic project management books. And then our answer was, as trainers of this Lean Basics training, is, well, if you do it lean, you can increase for the better on all of them. And the reason of that is that if you focus on waste, then reducing that, then you get so much time back that you can actually work on this quality as well, and on this timelines, and on the cost.
So Phil or Mark, do you have any comments to follow up on with Suzanne and Paul?
No, I think that you folks have covered this one quite well in terms of basically stating what the dilemma is and the different ways to try to get out of it. So,
okay, we're good. Great discussion. We could spend more time on this if we wanted, but we're going to move on. So again, this is our overview. Our first webinar was building a foundation. We believe that, you got to start with building a foundation. If you don't have the foundation built, then everything that you build on top is not going to work. So the foundation is focused on planning, communication, and collaboration and execution. And our second webinar was on rational risk taking. And the way that we look at risk is taking on risk in a maybe a different manner than mitigating risk. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then digitization, we've discussed that already. And then agile sprints, which is the next topic that we'll get into right now. So Phil, will kick us off here.
All right. So if you think about the product development world and the history of it, a long time ago, it was driven by an individual, an entrepreneur, and then later maybe an engineer, a scientist, etc. As we made progress as human beings, we have come to a place where it's no longer the case. We have to create complex product and systems, and requires a whole team to work together. And for product development and innovations in general have a terrible track record. Up to 90% of the products fail in the marketplace, or needed to be redone or withdrawn, re-evaluated, etc. A few decades ago, we made significant progress by creating what is known as phase gate process or stage gate process. The idea is adding some structure and rigor to the phases of developing product and services. You will see various versions of what we show on the right-hand side of the slide in various companies. The first part is we should understand the customer needs and the business requirements. We should have a concept, and we should get into the design of the concept in much greater detail, and eventually we should pilot it and then develop it. Well, that approach has worked quite a bit and made significant progress in adding reliability, predictability, and scalability to the product development. But what we notice is that in spite of the huge leap in the progress we made, product and services still fail. What the wisdom we have gained in the last several years is that the right side is very linear. The right side is very executed using the traditional project management approach. It works extremely well when the more and more certainty exists. So we talk about two dimensions: things we know that we know, the knowledge, and all the assumptions. Those are uncertainties. If that ratio is high assumptions and low knowledge, the right side actually fails. So this is where we invented what we call the sprint approach. The sprint approach works very well in dealing with uncertainties. Well, what are the uncertainties? There are 4 key uncertainties. One is the customer needs. And there are 2 kinds of customer needs: solution neutral customer needs and solution specific customer needs. I want to listen to music is a solution neutral customer need. But I have a need relating to my iPod or my streaming device. That's not solution neutral. It's still customer need. So that's the first challenge. Did we understand it? Did we holistically gather it? Did we prioritize it? The second uncertainty is, did we get the right idea? The most impactful idea, yet feasible. And that's not an easy task. That's a second uncertainty. The third uncertainty is that, do we have the right business model? You may have understood the customer need, you may have the right idea, it still fails because the business model falls apart. In spite of those 3 uncertainties, sometimes there's a 4th uncertainty, that's the likelihood of adoption. The adoption by the stakeholders. Customers comes first, but regulators and so many other people. So to solve those 4 uncertainties, we find that the agile method of iterative method to understand these uncertainties, very helpful. But the agile method still lacks what is needed for a flawless, perfect product that you can release to the market or bring it to your internal customers.
Yeah.
So the question is, do we do more of the sprint approach or do we do more of the phase gate approach? It's easy to say that do both. Actually, it has dependencies on culture, attitude, approach, and a whole bunch of systems. The right approach is to use both of them. What we found is the companies who are really good at the right-hand side are not so good at the left side. And the companies who are very good at the left side are not so good at the right side. So the approach we are proposing and have tremendous experience implementing it with companies is that when you have high uncertainty, your assumption to knowledge ratio is high, start with sprint. And when you reach a point where you're willing to take that risk of some assumptions, a lot of knowledge, You go to the right and said, now this is the time we can create products for design for X, design for reliability, design for usability, design for sustainability, design for X. And that's the approach of sprint coupled with stage gate. We did a whole webinar on the topic. So I'll stop talking and pass the mic back to you.
A little bit of passion there, Phil.
Yeah.
I love it. So Suzanne or Paul, any comments on this?
Yeah, I think it's spot on, basically, Phil. So in the front end of product development, obviously Philips and also domestic appliance has got a stage gate process, but I think having a stage gate process does not mean that you cannot learn within that stage gate process or be agile. Within domestic appliances, we are at this moment implementing a somewhat looser stage gate process that fits also this what we call rapid learning in the beginning, that really focuses on the known unknowns and filling those knowledge gaps so that we learn more. And that is fully also along the thinking that we've got in lean product development as well, where you talk about design then test versus test then design. And I struggled a lot in the beginning, I remember, to understand what I had to live through and understand what that means. But I think the simplest way to state that is, if you design then test, which is the traditional way of working, you make a concept and you test it, and then you figure out that it doesn't work, and then you have this long iteration loop to understand why it doesn't work and, let's say, redo your concept. Whereas in design, then whereas in a lean product development manner, you test and design, and then this testing is not to learn whether the concept works. This testing is to close knowledge gaps that you need to close in order to make your concept. So then you are only allowed to go into design when you tested enough to understand your solution space. And I think that test phase stage of front end does very much resonate also with this cyclic learning.
Great. Paul?
So I agree. These are two different ways of approaching the problems. And if you can approach both of them, that's great and ideal. Unfortunately, I think most companies, the culture within the company or the people working in it mean you can really only do one or the other. The mindset of the people you have tends to be one or the other. And it's very hard to force a completely free-thinking person into, you will follow these exact paths. Very hard to shift that. And the other one is the company culture. One of those two types of people will get rewarded, promoted, and pay rises. So kind of over time, you will push people to one or the other. So I think, I've done a lot of work in regulated medical devices. It tends to be more, if you're going to release a product there, you have a phase gate approach because you have to be very careful and lay out that process as you go through. The issues that I have seen are that you can do the phase gate approach, but there's tremendous pressure from the business on both ends. One, to release a product as fast as possible to get it out. The other is your customer and business requirements. You can be in gate 3 or gate 4, and then they'll come back and say, oh, actually, we've looked at the market again, and now we've changed this. And rather than say, okay, we're going to go back to the beginning, a lot of times the engineering department says, okay, we'll fix that, we'll throw that in there. And I think that requires a lot of discipline. So it requires discipline both across the engineering department that can do both of these, as well as within the organization, that your sales, marketing, and business side they know the time it's coming out. And then on the product management side is they feed in a consistent set of information. And then depending on your cycle time of your product, whether it be 6 months or 6 years, hold that. Is you can't change 3 months in or 3 years in, you can't change that. And that's a company culture thing. So these things, I think all of these are great, but how do you get the rest of your organization to both reward the appropriate behavior and to discourage abuse of it by the people who are supposed to be controlling it?
Yeah. What you are basically talking about, Paul, is that it's a paradigm difference, right? So it is a really different way of looking at the world, and therefore, when you are caught in one system, it's very hard to see even that other paradigm exists. So what sometimes I make effective use of is the disasters, right? That you have got in the stage gate process. I was once called to a project in Italy in order to help them with lean support, and they were already in phase 4 or even 5 in this diagram. And then, of course, there's not a lot you can do anymore because your solution space is so incredibly small that you actually every problem takes so much energy and time to fix because of that small solution space. So then is also the moment that you can tell stakeholders, hey, but we should have done that much better before gate 0, actually, to understand better and to choose our solutions well based on an understanding of the solution space. And that is also where you then get the green light to experiment with things. And I experienced it recently when I decided to go back into operations of R&D and led some front-end projects in coffee. I think as a project manager, there's so much you can do to make people work and think differently on their project by just not even explaining what you do almost, but just asking, okay, good, let's do a sprint of 2 weeks now, and let's then after that capture our knowledge in an A3. And then in the beginning, they will say, what's an A3? What's that about? But of course, you will find 1 or 2 supporters of the method. And they will show that it helps, and it helps the discussion. And then gradually, or pretty quickly, actually, you take the team along in this new paradigm. And they start to defend it even, which is really very nice to see. So at one hand, I agree with you that there is a paradigm shift, but on the other hand, it's not so hard to overcome it, I think.
Yeah, I also see there's an analogy here to a situation I lived in, which was we separated the product development engineers from the cost reduction engineers. And so it was almost like you have a new product, you throw it over the wall, and then the cost reduction engineers tear it apart, laughing at the decisions the product development engineers had made. And so in this, between this discovery phase and this flawless execution phase, it may be that you need to have different groups, at least in the beginning, until everybody gets comfortable with this idea that there are really two processes that need to be able to run. And so it's not, I don't like the idea of throwing it over the wall on that blue arrow there in the middle of the slide, but it's sort of, that sort of a mindset change as you move from one to the other, that if you're not comfortable with it, then have 2 groups of people until you do get comfortable with it.
Yeah, because those 2 groups of people do not do any good for either of those groups, basically. So what you actually get is one group complaining at the other, basically, which is not what you want.
You always will. You always will.
But I had this experience when I ran an architecture project for one of our coffee machines, and then I asked actually the people from production engineering in very early from industrialization, and they were really like, yeah, but you haven't got anything, I can't do something now. And then of course I had to help them to see what they could do, also in a stage where actually there was a lot of alternatives still open, because that's the place where they can get their requirements fixed, and it's not the place when we chose already.
And I agree, having multiple teams that can think differently is ideal. The problem there is you need a company that is large enough with a diverse enough range of products and a pipeline going from R&D through to production to support that. And that's also an ideal target for somebody to come in and cost cut, because it doesn't get felt for a few years. But even within, say, when you're working on the right-hand side, you can have, depending on your market, your market may be divided into, say, premium and lower cost. And even there, your teams have to think differently. If you're in a premium, very competitive market there for quality, you have to have a team that thinks, okay, here's my budget. How can I make this the best product I can within this budget? Whereas on the other side, if it's really cost sensitive, everybody is going, okay, how low cost can I make this? And it still meets the minimum quality requirement. And that is actually two very different sets of thinking. And even within there, you've got to have different people who think that. So you can start subdividing this down, but can you as a company support this? And I think a lot of it comes down to having management who understand that, I've got somebody who's better at this than this. I can't have everybody. Don't punish them, but support them for the things that they are not quite so good at, because I don't have infinite resources. But don't punish your staff. Reward them and just deal with the reality of the situation.
Yeah, in a way, it's also about being comfortable with so many things open, I think. So yeah, you started off with, yeah, it's maybe handy to have different groups, but on the other end, it's also very handy to have a very small team. And I think, Phil, you have seen in this front end that the smaller the team, the better it works almost. Whereas when you start to be in product development realization, sometimes those teams get 30, 40, 50 people with each their own island, and it's actually not helping a lot in a way. Of course, you have the in-depth expertise, but you lack the integration skills that you need, especially in those first stages. So yeah.
We could go on forever on this
yeah, this
topic.
is great discussion. I'm going to move on to
it is a neat one.
I'm going to go on to the polling. We're going to go to the polling. So I'd encourage everybody to respond to this polling question. What is your primary NPI process in your organization? Is it sprints, phase gates? You use them both. You don't use either. Or you're doing something different, which is fine. We'd love to hear from you. And again, please enter into the chat your ideas, your thoughts, comments, questions.
Link into the chat window, any chance?
So the link is at the beginning of the chat. If you go back up to the start of the chat, Jim loaded the link to the Poll Everywhere site. So.
Okay, so great. We have some phase gate and sprints and phase gates. And I can't see the chat right now. I got too many windows open on my screen. So
I'm watching it. We're in good show.
We got a message saying that the
link is not in the chat, huh?
So why don't we just put it again?
Not?
No.
We'll see if it
oh,
is.
maybe it is on the top, or just copy and repeat. Depends on when
it is,
someone joins.
It is on this slide as well. So you'd have to type it in. But anyways,
yeah, it's polling.com/Jim Vries 07. Yeah, maybe paste it in again if you would, Mark.
Yeah,
that would be helpful. Yeah, I didn't realize that if you came in later that you might not see it in the chat. So we apologize for that, but we like what we see here. Fantastic feedback, and it's what we've seen in other polling before.
So one of my questions to the folks who are doing this, are putting their that say they're using both sprints and phase gates. Do they see the problems that Paul outlined on the you're good at one but not at the other, and your business rewards one but not the other? It'd be interesting to see what your folks' experience is on that. So if you've got if you can put a sentence or so into the chat, we'll make sure everybody we can talk about it. Yeah.
But you won't be named, so you can say it and nobody will come back to you.
Yeah, I won't read out anybody's name unless it's Paul's.
But and I think another thing that Paul mentioned was the importance of leadership and how a leader can really switch the mindset. So if you have that type of situation where you had a CTO or a leadership team that was more focused on one or another, or switch between the two, that would be great to get your feedback and comments on that. That's been my experience also.
It's
Yeah, I think the leadership is extremely important for the good and also for the bad, of course. So it works two ways, unfortunately. But I think it's extremely important because the questions asked, especially in this front end phase, if the leadership continues to ask questions that actually belong to a stage gate phase, like how on the behind the comma will the business case look like, or what will be the NPV or whatever, and you are in this very first phase, then it's very hard as a team to keep into this learning modus.
Yes, I agree. And the leadership needs to make, I don't say a safe space, but sprints, almost by definition, you're going to have failures. Things are going to go wrong because your goal is to learn and learn quickly. And again, how does your organization say, well, you failed at that, but even if you learned, so are your employees, do they feel comfortable in doing that and having that interaction where they are prepared to try something that might not work just to learn it? Is that going to be something that will follow them, or is it, okay, you tried, you did it right? And leadership need to be able to communicate that and make people feel comfortable in doing so.
Yeah. So we did. So one of the comments we've got is the way they split it in their organization is they're using a sprints or learning cycles, you know, or they're using sprints for software, but then they're using learning cycles plus phase gate for hardware programs. So yeah, my experience mostly around hardware. So that's been my experience to do the, you know, to do the function development or the discovery separate from the actual product execution piece. You know, so function versus product. So
it also depends on, you know, how much of a paradigm changes, even if it's for hardware. So, you know, if you look at automotive world, they update the car every year, every 5 years. Even the 5-year update is not a significant departure from paradigm. But when you're moving from candle to light bulb, that's a paradigm shift. You have extremely high uncertainties in that world. And that's where, regardless of hardware or software, you need to resolve the two things that Paul mentioned. You have to learn fast and you want to learn cheap. And can I do that and uncover the uncertainty so that you can say, we used to make candle, but can we even get a shot at the light bulb? And what does it take to make light bulb? I mean, I didn't purposely choose this example. When Edison brought the light bulb to light, you know, he didn't have the idea. The idea existed before. It failed multiple times. But his genius was a business model, because to have the light bulb, you need the electricity to your home. And that's a business model innovation. And he did that in successive stages, bringing it to downtown, bringing it at the street, and eventually to your home. So back to the first question of life cycles are getting shorter and shorter. So new S-curves gets refound. And as a result, the stage gate companies are getting forced to adopt more and more the sprint approach to uncovering and learning fast. And that becomes the challenge. IBM did a research on the type of companies, the archetype, the culture. They found 4 of them. One is the visionary leadership type companies, the Apples of the world, where the leader has very good pattern recognition capability, and they select few and they execute it very well. The second was the marketplace of ideas. The Googles of the world, they do thousands of sprints and large or percentage of them fail, and they're set up that way. And then they go execute the ones that succeed. You see the sprint very heavily favored in those culture. Then the third model is the systematic innovation companies, the Samsungs and the GEs of the world. They are so used to doing the right-hand side approach, the stage gates, rigorous, and now with life cycle getting shorter, they have to learn the left side to be adaptable to the changing environment. And the fourth one is the companies who are using external through collaboration, they bring their innovations to the marketplace. But it's worthy to note the two groups who has to learn the other. The agile groups have to learn how to make their products not fail and reliable in the marketplace. There's a famous example of a small company that tried to create adaptable cars that can be made to self-driving. He created a kit. He thought it worked, it fine. He's ready to launch it. The National Highway and Transportation Safety shut him down, saying, show me your reliability data, show me the long list of stuff. It failed.
So regulations can kill innovation.
Yeah.
I think
maybe it's time
Suzanne
to
mentioned before.
Yeah.
And Paul.
I think it's
fantastic.
Time to
I think we're gonna. Yeah, we'll go to the next topic. This is great discussion. Thank you for participating. Is there any more questions in the chat, Mark?
Not at this point. It's just that we're not changing the slides. Was a comment.
All right. So we'll try to. We knew that when we started this, we probably wouldn't get through all the 4 topics. We'll try to take on the next one and see where we're at. If we're at the top of the hour, we might end with this topic on rational risk taking. And as Mark reminds me all the time, this is maybe counterintuitive to some, because generally when people consider risk, they identify, assess, mitigate, manage the risk to reduce the impact of a failure. But what we're going to talk about today is adding or taking on risk in a new product or service in order to reduce the time to delivery of the product or service. And this directly relates to the risk appetite and the knowledge of your design tolerances. This may seem backwards, as we said, but it's a way to gain speed to market. So we've broken it out into a few different areas. First, we talk about NPI, about the risk appetite. To drive multiple factors, potential cost versus benefit, that comparison. And then we'll talk about the position in the market, the first mover, category leader, the catch up, and then the third is the market dynamics, price sensitivity, speed of innovation. So that's one perspective to look at. The next is the risk categories. We have the 4 risk categories of time, performance, resources, and cost. Of course, time, we're talking about schedule slippage, performance, whether you're on target, off target from your original goals. And of course, the resources, how you're managing those resources and are they available when you need them to be. And then of course, cost, cost per unit and driving that. Those are your risks. And then the other thing that we discussed in this webinar was focusing on achieving speed through looking at these 3 approaches: shortening the task, perfect is the enemy of good, right? Which is often counterintuitive for the research or engineering pursuit. Breaking dependencies, starting the next step before all predecessors are done. This is a lot of critical path type of mindset. And then data analysis, predicting outcomes based on variation. So variation is the root of all evil, many say. If you can control your variation relative to your tolerance limits, you can shift things, move things rather rapidly and increase your speed to market. So with that, I'll open it up to Suzanne and Paul on your comments on this topic. Have you explored any of these? And what is your thought?
Suzanne, why don't you go first?
Yeah, that's good. I was thinking what to start with. So I think here, one of the things that you see a lot, especially in the stage gate processes where you realize product development, is that people start to buffer. So on the project level, but also on each of the task levels. So if you ask a mechanical engineer, how long will it take to develop this part? he will, when he thinks it might take 6 days, he will tell you that it's 8, so that there's a buffer in there. And if everyone starts doing those buffers, then of course the whole thing gets longer. Similarly, for cost, you get the same thing, or weight, if that's important in your industry. Also there, buffers all the way. So there, I think one of the suggestions of, this chap of Critical Chain, I forgot his name. He said it was a good idea to put that buffer separate, so to make a buffer and do buffer management on that, and then work with the average durations, average costs, rather than the 80% or something confidence level. So I think that is one of the things where what you see is when people start to squeeze timelines or squeeze out the last cents of the cost, that you need to start doing that in order to still give the people confidence that if something is not okay, that there is still a project buffer to absorb. Maybe I stop here and let you.
I'll just comment. When I hear average, I always think of, if you want to make an average product, just take the average of an average of an average and drive your product through averages. And
now what I mean is, if you, for example, suppose there's 4 tasks, and if you would do an estimate of each of those tasks, suppose that each of them takes 6 days, in your, let's say, 50% estimate, which is what I called average or referred to as average earlier, then the whole thing will take 6 times 4 is 24 days. Whereas when you allow people to put their buffers in, the whole thing will take 32, right? 4 times 8 days. So the better idea is to plan 24 days plus, for example, 3 or 4 days for the project buffer.
Yeah.
A gold right name, of course.
Yeah.
I just looked at my bookcase. It's in there.
So I would say, assuming you're not an Apple or a Google who effectively have infinite resources to throw at a particular problem, much of this depends on the type of company you are. So if you're a large company, if you're a Philips with an established product line and you're well known in the market and you have revenue that's coming in from that, you can't risk all that revenue. Can you take certain components of your product line and really take big risks with them? Tell one of your development teams, just shoot for the moon on this. We'll be fine if this one doesn't work. But make sure they're compensated for taking that risk. They're not punished for taking the risk and then not succeeding. So you can do that with one or a small number of them. Whereas you go to a company like mine. I'm a small company trying to break into essentially create a new market. I'm not going to do that with a whole product unless I have something that's stellar and makes a difference. I'm not going to succeed. So I have to take the risks of building something that is exceptional, and there isn't a fallback. So actually, and I've seen companies that are kind of in the middle, and what they do is they're kind of they're in the middle of the two, and they're initially shooting for the moon, and then they get a little bit scared. They go, well, maybe I should put some resources into this and this and this, and suddenly everything gets diluted. And so a lot of this is when you have a certain number of resources, choose what you're going to do. If you're number 1 in the market, it's very different than if you're number 5 or if you're not even in the market. You've now got to start thinking differently about that. The further down you are, the more risk you have to take. Or if you're up there, the less risk you want to take, but you can't spread it out.
Yeah, I find that. Go ahead.
Can you bring up slide 18?
Slide 18, sure. Yeah. My pleasure.
Go ahead. Yeah. So this is one of the things I think. It's also the size of your company or the newness of the company. What one of the things we talked about was that for your different business models, there's risk that you're willing to accept with, knowing that the outcome may not be what you want. But, so like if you want to be first to market, you may accept the performance risk to say, I'm not going to get everything out there, super clean. But if you're, a luxury brand, for instance, you're you're going to take on more cost in order to get this luxury product out there, and so that you're going to recoup that by putting a price that's above the market price. So these are the sorts of things when we talk about risk appetite for the different business models. What are you willing to do to get speed or to get into the market?
Yeah, I think on the other hand, you say that product launch with less features is catch up, but also when you are first to market, so this whole concept of minimum viable product is, I think, launching a product with lower features, and possibly, probably there are many more features that you could think of, but you just chose these particular features to launch. And when the number of products in the market is still small, then you can also have that acceptable. I think you see that very well in the Microsoft suite. If you have Office 365, and a couple of years back they started with this online versions that when you open SharePoint, you got this online version. You could hardly do anything with it rather than maybe you could type a letter, but that was maybe it, or do a small calculation. And now you see that they add on all the things that you've got also in this offline or desktop versions. So they actually are a very established company that is definitely not catching up, but they do launch with fewer features in order to get that done. And you can also see what their strategy is, by the way.
So we have a comment in the chat that about risk categories, and one is that the timing risk is frequently caused by unknown outcomes from adoption of new technologies, and so learning cycles can help mitigate that. Once again, this is mitigating it. And then another risk is the market risk. Will the customer actually accept what you've put out there? And so, if you don't know, if you say I'm going to go charge ahead with this product without understanding that, you're at the risk of massive lost, opportunity costs. So one of the things that we talked about in the webinar was, what are the contingencies if something does happen? So if you say, I'm moving ahead without vetting this with the market, the contingency would be, I've got a way of, if it does fall flat, of quickly retooling it to try something else. So those definitely are some heavy duty risk categories. And what we talked about in this webinar is, are there ways you can leverage those categories to get more speed?
So I'm going to try to go back to the polling question. We have just a few minutes. Maybe we try to do one poll and close it out. How would you characterize your organization's risk appetite? A, voracious. We see risk-taking as key for our success. B, high. We take risk when rewards outweigh the potential costs. C, medium. We take risk when we are confident and we can manage them. And then D, low. We avoid risk as much as possible. So I will show the responses. Thanks everyone for responding. And drum roll. C, we take risk when we are confident and we can manage them. Okay. So I have some thoughts, but I'll let Paul or Suzanne to any comments on this?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty logical. I don't know exactly of which industries everyone is, but if you are in a medium-sized to large-sized company, then this is I think also connecting to what Paul said earlier, you cannot put your brand at risk or other things. So you can take risks if you are confidently enough to manage them, because putting something in the market that you know won't work will not be accepted, not by yourself and your own pride, but also not by the management and not by the cost of non-quality that it all delivers. So I think in general, if you are in hardware, that's the only choice. If you are in software, of course, you can go to A and B because you can fix everything pretty fast. But when you are in a hardware, solving a problem can easily take 5 to 10, 12, 15 weeks. So That's a lot of sales.
Yeah, one of the things you said came up in our webinar and Phil and our discussions early on is when you are in harm's way. When one is in harm's way, you treat risk much differently than if you have a product that it is not in harm's way, where there's no safety issue. That is a big trigger there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with Suzanne. I'd be very interested to see the answers to this tied, as Suzanne mentioned, either to industry or size of that industry or existing product lines. And it's interesting, nobody said we avoid risks as much as possible, but you do end up with some companies in there, typically if they're in a monopoly position, they don't have to care. As the old joke about the phone company, we don't care because we don't have to.
Sure.
And then it's just about turning the handle and cranking it out. So these are very much tied to your position, but it's also, do you understand your position? And do you understand that maybe there are competitors coming up trying to, that will take it away? Is there a paradigm shift coming? And so I've tended to notice a little more complacency in larger companies, but that's my preferences towards the risk taking. That's my personality.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the good thing is that we can connect this part of the discussion to the first part where we talked about the sprints and learning cycle. So if you've got something very risky, then you can also de-risk it by doing a lot of learning and increasing this assumption to knowledge ratio. I'm going to keep that in my language because I like it a lot. So yeah, if you increase that or decrease, no, what was it? Increase it, so that you have more knowledge and less assumptions, then you actually are reducing your risk as well, right?
Yep. All right. Are there any comments in the chat, Mark?
No, I think we're caught up on that right now. So Jim, you said you had some comments here.
Well, I'm going to wrap it up. We're a couple minutes over. We could probably talk about this at a fireside chat with some good s'mores or something. But I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today for our fireside chat. It seems like we have way too much to talk about, which is good.
We always do.
Just like to be a good fireside chat. So we appreciate everybody's participation. And just a couple notes at the end as we close out. You know, there'll be a webinar next week. We have a series of webinars out there. We talked about them early on. And wanted to thank again Suzanne and Paul for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us and provide that much needed insight from people that are feet on the street really doing the work. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. And on behalf of Phil, Mark, and myself, we appreciate everyone joining, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. And have a great day, great evening, great everything.